Well, look, I certainly love the classic resort skiing. I will say, like, touring is not for everybody. Right? You do need to be pretty fit. You're going to brave the elements and this ever-changing weather. Sometimes you'll be warm and sweaty, and sometimes the wind will howl. And you're going to sleep in bunk rooms with others. You're going to have these long uphill marches and these traverses, and you're carrying 25 to 35 pounds in a backpack. So, in many regards, it doesn't sound like a lot of fun on the surface, but if you love the outdoors, if you love adventure, if you're fit and you want to continue to stay fit, you like the camaraderie because you're out there in a group, and then the scenery. So if you like hiking and things like that and skiing, it's that combination. It's a different vibe, it's a different feel, it's a different set of vistas, and you're getting out to places that very few people go. And like I said, if you like adventure and physical activity, then it's fantastic.
Hello, intrepid listeners, and welcome to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. We've had all sorts of adventures on this show over the months. Mountaineering, cycling, running, sailing, swimming, paddling, freediving, highlining, dog sled racing. But surprisingly, I have yet to have a guest speak about skiing adventures. Well, today's episode addresses that. My guest this week is a former colleague of mine, Dave Hoffman, and he describes his week-long, off-piste, hut-to-hut ski touring adventures in the Swiss and Austrian Alps. It might seem odd to cover this topic just as the ski season ends, but hey, if Dave's story inspires you to give hut-to-hut ski touring a try, then now is the time to book a tour for next season. Enjoy the show. Dave Hoffman, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm awesome, Dale. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm awesome. I knew you'd say I'm awesome because I've known you for 10 years now, and that's
Longer.
that's your signature greeting, and I love it. It shows you're always awesome. I don't know.
Well, I'm super, super positive on life in general and pretty much everything. We have it really good, and I'm very thankful for how good I have it in so many ways.
And that's why I've always liked you. So, Dave, we've known each other, like I said, a decade or so as we've been helping banks in our professional life. Who would have thought 10 years ago that we'd be sitting here with a little fireside chat on a podcast? Who would have thought?
Not me. I'm not sure I knew what a podcast was when I first met you, but certainly
Yeah.
the tee up for this is you've always been an adventurous type, and I think that's probably why we get along so well.
Yeah, I would sit there in the office at the desk with you working, and you'd talk about all your skiing. You are my inaugural ski episode. I've done 24 episodes on swimming, biking, running, climbing, all these other things, paddling. I have yet to do a ski one, so I'm excited about this.
Oh, fantastic! I like to do all those other things as well, by the way, but certainly skiing, as you'll hear today, is a bit of like sort of top of my list from a passion perspective.
Yeah, I can tell you've always lived and breathed skiing. So before we get into the ski adventures, tell us a little bit about yourself, just your general background.
Oh, wow. So Dave Hoffman, 62 years old, retired about 2.5 years ago. I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, a little, and certainly some of my friends think of me as the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those that think of you that way. So skiing, pretty much everybody's familiar with traditional downhill alpine skiing and cross country skiing, but your adventures in the recent years a little bit different. Can you tell us what that skiing is all about?
Yeah, so I took up ski touring about 10 years ago. And ski touring, for those of you who don't know it or are not familiar with it, is kind of like a combination or a combo of cross country skiing and downhill alpine skiing. And you have
And
special
backpacking.
and
And backpacking.
backpacking. So yeah, throw in hiking and camping,
Yeah.
and you've kind of got that you can do ski touring sort of locally at any place. Even my local resort, you can do uphill travel, and so I'll oftentimes go over and do an uphill and ski down before the lifts open. So you can do it at your local hill, you can do it anywhere that has snow and hills. But it's, as mentioned, it's kind of a combination of downhill, alpine, and cross country. And the gear is set up such that your heel releases like a cross country ski, and you put skins on the bottom in order to give you traction on the way up, and then you literally rip the skins off at the top, and you then set your heel because they're special bindings, and then it's pretty much with minor variations on the gear. It's pretty much downhill alpine skiing, from there. So it's a combination of up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yeah, more up than down it would seem probably, huh? At
It
least
definitely,
time-wise.
it's more like 90% up and 10% down. But that's why it's also like hiking and camping and backpacking, because as we'll talk about in some of the hut to hut trips, you carry most of your own gear, and you're going up probably 90% of the time. But the descents are fantastic because they're typically in places that no one has touched, or no one has touched recently.
Yeah, just virgin snow powder.
Hmm.
So hut to hut, tell me what that is.
So, hut to hut, generally speaking, the Alps is the epicenter. The European Alps are the epicenter of the hut to hut skiing, and probably the most famous hut to hut trip, which you can also do hiking not in winter, but in when there's no or limited snow on the ground, is called the Haute Route, Hauteroute. And the Haute Route is basically going from Chamonix in France to Zermatt in Switzerland. Then you do go through Italy for a little bit of it as well. And the Haute Route is something that my friend Kevin and I just happened across, and we said, "Oh, look at that! That looks kind of interesting. Let's give it a go." And so we signed up with some guides, and we bought all the gear, and we practiced a bit, and then we flew over and joined up with our guides, an American couple who were living in Chamonix. It was myself and my friend Kevin, and then a group of others, three guys from the Sacramento area and two women from the Seattle area. We met up with them one evening, got to know each other, got the lay of the land, and the next morning we set about on the Haute Route from Chamonix.
How long did that take? How far is that distance-wise? How many huts? How many nights? Like,
I
what's that tour
believe
like?
it's about 70 miles total, and it was 8 days and 7 nights for us, and
Okay.
every night was a different hut, with one exception. We hit some interesting and terrible weather one day, and we had to bail out into this Swiss village and drop down and stay in an actual inn in a lift serviced area for one night. That was the only time I took a shower stroke bath the whole week. And so we stayed there, and then we got back on the route. So you have to be prepared for those sorts of diversions, given that Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. But there are a series of these huts, and they're all over the Alps. We just happened to pick the Haute Route as our first one of these, and as you'll hear later, we did another one a few years ago, 2 years ago in Austria. And I'm working on another one for next April of 26 with a group. And so this is hut to hut to hut. Now, when you think of these huts in the Alps, you might get this vision of it's like a 10 by 10 room, but it's not. It's actually a reasonably nice, I wouldn't call it luxurious, but it's a reasonably nice hut that houses anywhere from, say, 25 or 30 people up to, say, 80 people. The huts are only accessible by snowmobile or snowcat or helicopter, but they're provisioned reasonably well. Again, it's not the lap of luxury. Sometimes you're staying in a room with just one other person. Other times you're on a set of bunk beds that have 8 people down below and 8 people up above, on a mat with a sleep sack and a blanket and a pillow that's provided by the hut. And that's your sleeping arrangement. So as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of snoring and the like. But so the sleeping arrangements may not be the most luxurious, but the hut itself is generally very comfortable, very cozy. Fireplaces, great food, booze, you name it, and a lot of great camaraderie in these huts. And so we went through a series of these, 7 nights, 6 in huts and one in this hotel, and you end up coming into Zermatt on the final day of the Haute Route, and that was my introduction to ski touring in a hut to hut environment, and it was a great experience. And so we did it again 2 years ago, and planning to do it again next winter.
Wow. So it sounds like the accommodations, it's almost like youth hostel style back, when you're backpacking through Europe as a kid or something like that, right?
Yeah, we did that when we were in our 20s, and it's got a lot of
Yeah.
similarities to that. You're in a group,
Yeah.
except that there are very few people under the age of 26 in these huts in the Alps, but
Yeah.
it's a it's a full age range of people, as you can imagine.
I
But
would
it
think
has some
after,
similarities to that. You're carrying everything except basically for your food and your blanket and pillow. You're carrying with you. When you get to the hut, they get you set up in there. You put your gear away, and but you're carrying pretty much everything that you need for the touring part in your pack. But they do provide breakfast and dinner, and you can buy food and make a lunch or other things to eat while you're out during the day, moving on to the next hut.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the hut experience.
Wow. Nice. And so this scenery, I've seen some of your photos. It's spectacular. I mean, I guess I've never been in the Alps in the winter, but it's all pretty much above tree line skiing, right?
The Alps is very different than in the U.S. Rockies and East Coast, where a lot of it you're skiing, with trees all around. So yes, the tree line in the Alps is very low. So most, if not all, of the touring is above tree line, which makes for amazing scenery and vistas and the like, with just vast open, fields of snow and peaks and glaciers. Of course, there's quite a bit of your time touring is across and through and around glaciers as well.
What's a typical day like then? Are you out on your skis like 6 hours, 8, 10 hours? Or, I mean, to get from one hut to the next, you're just out in the open, nothing
You
around, right?
are, yeah, you really are, and it's anywhere from 4 or 5 hours up to 7 or 8 hours of time in between each hut. So typically, when you first arrive, most of these things you end up taking a lift from some resort town, and so you do take that first lift, and then you're backcountry from there. Although on our most recent trip, it was too windy, and so we had a 7 mile uphill to get that started because the lift wasn't running that day. So that was a
Oh,
long day. So you'll typically do that, and
surprise. It's like, surprise. Hey,
exactly.
we didn't sign up for that.
No, we did not. And so we would typically, just to get it started. The very first one we did was amazing. We went up basically to the Vallée Blanche, which is a giant glacier just on the other side of the peak of Mont Blanc in Chamonix. And you get up there, and there's a lot of people that aren't going to do the tour. They're going to ski down, or they're going to ride the lift back down. The snow was waist deep, and there was a ridge line that we had to work our way down before we put our skis on. And there was a rope there because on either side of you were big drop offs. And so you held onto the rope until you got down this little spine, and then you put your skis on. And I'll never forget, like, the snow was really deep, and you couldn't see very far. And our guides waited until another much younger guide from Italy set off because the visibility was quite low. And so he waited for them, and then he gave them a little time, and then we set off on a slightly different path from them. So we ended up going all the way down the glacier to the very bottom. We skied that, and then we put our skins on, and we skinned up to our first hut. I can't remember, maybe 3 or 4 hours on and off of skinning up. And we arrive at the hut that is, as you can imagine, quite remote. It's just kind of sitting there on a, small ridge line. So you get to the hut, and you tend to bring something a little more comfortable to get out of your sweaty clothes and put your hut gear on and your hut shoes on. And then there is just living areas in the huts where there's typically a fire. You can get a beer or a glass of wine, or you'll see a picture of perhaps of this liqueur we found called Genepi, which we quite enjoyed. And so you'll
Huh.
hang around and you'll meet people from all over the world. And you're like the hostel experience you mentioned earlier. You'll meet people, you'll chat with them, you'll chat with your own group, and you'll hang around for a while. And then they'll set you up for dinner. And the food is actually really quite good. It's very, very good. And so you'll have a group meal served family style at communal tables, and you're eating whatever they're serving that night. And they'll typically have soup and then an entree with some sides and then a dessert. And then you might hang around for an after dinner drink, but you've had a long day. And so it's pretty early nights. So you're
Yeah.
retiring to either a private or a communal room. And then the next morning, you're getting up generally kind of early. There were a couple of long days where we had headlamps. So we started out in the dark and
Hmm.
got going for maybe an hour in the dark, but that only happened a couple of times.
How much weight are you carrying in those packs? I mean, you're out there for a week. It's got to be tough skiing with a lot of gear.
I want to say it's in the 25 to 35 pounds on your back range. Obviously, plus your skis and some other things. So during the day, you're carrying your lunch or snacks, and you're carrying water and or tea,
Hmm.
so that you've got that sort of thing going on. But gearing up wise, it's about a 38 to 42 liter pack, and a lot of compartments and everything, because you've got along the way, layers are really important. You've got to like gear up and down for the weather, so you can layer up, but you're traveling uphill, so you're working up some body heat, and so you're
Yeah.
shedding layers as you go, and stuffing those either in your packs or in a pocket as you go.
Then you turn around and go down and you're freezing.
And there were some times where we get to the peak, and then the wind is howling because you're at the peak about to go down, and you've got to exactly you layer up. You put you might have thin gloves on, and you put some heavy mittens on. You're dropping a hat and a shell, and you're getting all that, and then you've got to get your skins on. Take your skins off, rip your skins off, and put those in the pack. And then you're going to do a descent, down to something, and every now and then you'll do some bagging peaks. Our guides,
Yeah.
and many of the guides are also mountain climbing guides in the summertime. And so there are various points where you'll take your skis off and you'll put on boot crampons and you'll hike up something. In a couple of instances, we were roped up just because of the cliff or fall off in a couple different places, and so you'll do a little bit of that. There was even one area on the Haute Route where there's a series of ladders and platforms to get over one of the peaks. We
Hmm.
had to climb with our boot crampons and then climb a series of ladders and platforms to get up over the top, and then put the skis back on and drop down on the other side of that.
Yeah, I saw some of the photos. It's pretty rugged terrain out there, so I can imagine that you got some tough climbs.
Yeah, some of it is steep climb. Some of it you have to go back and forth, like switchbacks. Other
Huh.
times you'll take them off and boot pack it up. And you also have ski crampons. So in certain instances, the ski crampon helps you with the maintenance of your traction because it goes into the snow, or in many cases into the ice, depending on the conditions. And there was one occasion on the Haute Route where we actually rappelled down, not like a cliff, but our guides roped us up and we had to walk backward with our skis, strapped to our packs. And you'll basically rappel down the other side. So lots of little mini side adventures, as I said, as part of the overall adventure.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of work. I think people enjoy traditional downhill skiing because the chairlift does the work for them, and then you just let gravity pull you down. What is it that you like about this style of skiing, the ski touring, versus just regular downhill at your classic lodge?
Well, look, I certainly love the classic resort skiing. I will say, like, touring is not for everybody, right? You do need to be pretty fit. You're going to brave the elements and this ever changing weather. Sometimes you'll be warm and sweaty, and sometimes the wind will howl. And, you're going to sleep in bunk rooms with others. You're going to have these long uphill marches and these traverses, and you're carrying 25 to 35 pounds in a backpack. So, in many regards, it doesn't sound like a lot of fun on the surface. But if you love the outdoors, if you love adventure, if you're fit and you want to continue to stay fit, you like the camaraderie because you're out there in a group, and then the scenery. So if you like hiking and things like that and skiing, it's that combination. It's a different vibe, it's a different feel, it's a different set of vistas, and you're getting out to places that very few people go. And if, like I said, if you like adventure and physical activity, then it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm wondering too, like, I mean, I enjoy downhill skiing, but I've always gravitated more to the cross country, both for the exercise of it and once you buy your skis, every time you go out, it's free instead of paying $100 or $200 or whatever for, lift and,
Yeah, you're underestimating the
mid-mountain ride.
cost of lift service skiing these days at the big resorts, because it could be
Yeah.
close to $300 a day if you buy
That's
by the day.
crazy. Yeah, it's gotten so expensive, and I think it's just from a socioeconomic standpoint, it just shuts a lot of people out. But tell me on this ski touring, is it more accessible financially than like so you did 7 days, 8 days for the hot route, and that includes the skiing and the lodging and the food.
Right.
And if you were to compare, going to, Vail or Aspen or whatever and having lodging and lift tickets and food, how does this compare? Is it equivalent?
It's definitely less expensive, mostly because you're not paying for that lift ticket, and the lodging is less expensive. So I would say the accommodations and food and everything is a little less expensive. You do have a guide though, so you do have to pay for a guide. And
Yeah,
if you're principally an alpine skier, you're going to have to buy new gear as well. Now,
yeah,
the gear lasts a long time,
yeah,
and the hut to hut is one form of ski touring, but you don't have to do hut to hut. There's plenty of places, even here in the Northeast where I live, where you can just go and find places in New Hampshire and Vermont where you can just do it for the day. They do actually, in both the White Mountains and the Green Mountains, they do have huts, some of which are outfitted for winter, but mostly those are for hiking. Vermont's got better hut access than New Hampshire. At that point, once you get your gear, then a little bit like cross country, you can just do it for the day. And I know some people who that's all they do is they tour and they don't bother
yeah.
with lift access skiing. And so you'll definitely save some money from the lift tickets, which can get quite expensive, as we all know. And yes, it's definitely less expensive. And I know a few people who that's principally what they do. They don't really do much lift service skiing at all.
I would say I'm a very rudimentary downhill skier. Like I can get myself down any blue or green, and I look like a hack, but I can get down a black painfully. What would it take for me to go out and do something like the hot route? Do I have to be a much better skier than I am?
I would say, Dale, it's less about how good of a skier you are. The biggest thing is an ability to get down things that are not groomed. So it's less about being a great skier. You have to be a pretty good skier, but you have to be able to handle what in Europe they call off piste. So you've got to be comfortable in powder. You've got to be comfortable in varied conditions because you're not going to be skiing fresh corduroy like you do at a
Hmm.
lot of lift serviced resorts. But it's going to be a lot of powder on the descents, and you're going to have some uneven terrain. You're going to be in trees sometimes. It's not about speed. It's not about being on the free ride world tour and, doing 360s and flips and things like that. But you do need to be able to get yourself down. You don't have to look good doing it. You don't have to have great technique doing it, but you do have to get yourself down powder and or, off-piste terrain. And that's one of the things that if you haven't done this before, you're going to want to get some practice doing that in addition to some of the uphill techniques.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear you say you don't have to look good doing it. You just have to get down.
That's right.
I never look good downhill skiing. So you did the hot route, and then you mentioned you did another trip in Austria. Tell me about that one. What was that route, and how was that different?
Yeah, the Austria trip was different in the sense that The Haute Route is often described as getting from point A to point B, from getting from Chamonix to Zermatt. My next hut trip was Silveretta hut tour in Austria, where we began in Ischgl. On that trip, we did three different huts. So the experience was just a little bit different in that we got to that first hut and we spent 3 nights at that one. And so we did loops. So we did ascents and descents in and around, and we did a couple of peaks that we climbed up. And so we did 3 nights there. Then we worked our way over to the second hut and we did 2 days there. And then we worked our way over to a third hut and we did 3 nights there. And then we finished with a very, very long run out that took us down by another lift serviced resort. And so the Silveretta trip was only 3 huts. And then next year, the trip we're doing it's just one hut. And so you take a snowcat in to this hut, and it's called Valhalla Mountain Touring, and it's in a remote part of the Canadian Rockies. So each one's a little bit different. So if you like variety and you like skiing and hiking, all the other things we talked about here, then this is something you might want to try.
Is there avalanche risk there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, that's like cat skiing and helicopter skiing. Avalanche danger is always there. That's why I would always go with a guide. If I did this a lot, then that would be different. But on the hut to hut tours, I've always gone with a guide. On the day trips, it's less important to do that. But either way, you've got avalanche danger. So you've got the traditional Avi gear, which is a beacon, and you do all the training and refresher courses every time you go. You've also got a probe and a shovel in case you do need to find someone who's been, fully or partially buried. For us, we also had an ice axe and some other things because some of the things we were doing were quite steep. But generally speaking, the guides are fantastic at understanding where there's a higher risk of avalanche,
Hmm.
and the guide's always going first, and so, that's one of those things that it's always there, but you're ever mindful of that danger and you're ever focused on, mitigating that risk and staying away from the areas that are more prone to it.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to give this a try without having to, invest too much time and money?
Yeah, look, it's one of those things where it's not for everybody, right? And so you have to have a good sense of both the good and the bad, and we've talked a lot about that on this in this discussion. It's not a luxury vacation, but you will have some elements of luxury, but mainly it's a great outdoor adventure. So just know that you're going to experience all these great things, but there'll be some discomfort and things like that. It's a good idea to practice some backcountry skiing, close to home. So when we did our first one, we got our gear. You don't need to buy all your gear. You can rent the gear, and a lot of the guides will have gear that you can use. I would say the one thing that I would not borrow or rent would be boots. The boots are probably the most important piece of equipment. And then I'd say, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad gear. So
Yeah.
getting the right gear, whether it's your skis or your layers, layers to regulate body temp and allow you to pack
Yeah.
light. And then look, you don't have to buy it all. Like I said, you can all the Avi gear, the skis. I would buy your boots, but everything else you could either rent or borrow if you wanted to. And then I would say if you are going to buy it, it's not a bad idea that you're going to be going uphill 90% of the time. It's not a bad idea to have light gear. And then
Yeah.
obviously how you pack, the adventurous types who do things like this, you learn to pack pretty light, and layers help you do that. And so I think those would be the things I would advise anybody who wants to take this up to think about.
Yeah, I guess you'd rather be a little ripe after a week without a shower and change of clothes than having to schlep another 10 or 15 pounds of clothing up mountain after mountain.
Absolutely.
Well, Dave, this has been fascinating. I always want to go out and try something after I've spoken to a guest on this show. Now I want to go try ski touring. My last question, as it always is for my guests, and you've already given away your next plan for ski touring, so this doesn't count. Do you have some other next dream adventure or goal that gets you revved up?
Well, Dream Adventure, I guess it's a dream, but it's going to become a reality in October. So a couple years ago, we did our first bike tour in Portugal, and we had a nice time with that. This one, Melanie came with me for this. We went with six other couples. And in October of this year, of 25, we're doing our next bike tour, and this one will be on a boat for our lodging. So we will fly to Turkey, Istanbul, then Bodrum, and we will get on a boat that's got 7 staterooms for 7 couples and then a captain on the boat. And so we will go from Greek Isle to Greek Isle on the boat. And every morning when we get up, we'll disembark and we'll get on our bikes and we'll ride anywhere from 20 to 40 or 50 miles on whatever Greek Isle we have, where we've stopped. And then we will get back on the boat and move on to the next Greek Isle. And we'll do that for 7 days. So that one I think will be super interesting. We've not been to Greece before, similar to the ski touring. On this one, the accommodations, I'm sure, will be small and tight because it'll be on a boat, but we'll certainly be enjoying, all the cuisine and the wine and everything like that on our next bike trip.
Fantastic. And that'll be good in October. You'll have beat the summer heat
Yes, and avoid the crowds.
and the crowds. Yeah, no kidding. Oh, that's great. Well, Dave, this was fantastic. Just reconvening after we both retired from our day jobs at the desk, and glad to hear you're getting out there having fun adventures like that.
More and more all the time in retirement, Dale.
All right. Well, you take care. Have a good day.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. If you like the show, there's nothing more valuable to me than you following it and sharing it with others. I drop a new episode every Friday, so tune in again for another great adventure story. And check out the accompanying website, www.gocarpediemnow.com, and then go seize the day and live your dream.